Hi everyone, Dan Gunner from Insane Forensics. Welcome back to Tech Talk Tuesday. Today we're going to cover threat hunting APT3439 and generic reconnaissance and discovery behaviors. And specifically hopping right into it, what we're going to look for is network scanning in the recon or discovery phase. So this includes port scanning, service scanning, OS scanning, and to a degree vulnerability scanning. Today we're going to focus on Nmap and Nikto on these two scanners. So they're both modular frameworks, and the attacker, the user, can control what the module executes. What's important is this is going to change the indicators that you see on the wire if an attacker chooses the stealthy option or if they choose the loud throw all the kitchen sink option, and we'll see that a little later on. Some modules are louder than others, so some modules are just doing partial SYN scans, while other modules might be doing very loud brute forces or other queries that will very easily get picked up. The user can also control certain traffic characteristics about this. So we'll see later that user agents and URLs can be manipulated as you look for these behaviors. Starting with Nmap first, so Nmap is a fully featured port OS service and vuln scanner. It's been around for a while. I think it's been around since 1997. It's included in Kali Linux and it's commonly taught in InfoSec courses. So this is a tool that you will see frequently. You see it frequently in the red teaming side. You also sometimes see it by actual APT groups. So APT34 and 39 are two groups that we're seeing using this technique. Starting with the loudest, throw everything, throw the kitchen sink at an option. An attacker might choose to do Nmap TAC, capital A, give it the port 0 through 1024 and 8000 and give it the IP address. What the TAC capital A does in this case is it's an aggressive scan that'll run every Nmap script against the given IP address or the subnet that you do. What the attacker sees back from this is the service information. So in this case, we can see the 4 ports that are open, your 3 traditional Windows ones, 135, 139, 445. You see the services and version information there. And then we see port 8000. And what we see here is simple HTTP server in the specific version of Python that's running on this port. It does show you also some of the service info for the OS that's seen there. So it's a Windows OS and you have a CPU string. Some of the tools in Nmap will also enumerate into other services. So what you see down a little lower is some of the SMB account information that was enumerated over port 135 and port 139. Through this method, it was able to pull this specific version of Windows out. And where this specific version of Windows is going to be useful is if an attacker does this and they have this, they can now do additional planning and targeting for your network now that they have a very specific version of Windows without having to touch the network again. So an attacker might choose to use this reconnaissance technique to then take the OS version and be able to build a plan and build the right tools and decide what to do without having to touch your network again. If we hop into the defensive side of this though, we have some very specific indicators and some very loud indicators that show what's going on. So Nmap uses very specific user agents. So in this case, it's Mozilla 5.0. You see Nmap scripting engine and the Nmap URL there. This is a dead giveaway that Nmap's being used in this case. Some plugins might use different user agents and they might hard code their user agent in here too. This is something that might exist on the framework level or it might exist on the plugin level. So the user agent's one. The URL is another. Here we have Nmap lower check and a number in here. This is a very obvious URL that might show that you're getting scanned. We'll see another example on the next slide on some of the service detection of another URL. Plugins sometimes have these hard-coded URLs. So if an attacker is not choosing to run or not choosing to not run certain plugins, it's going to show up in PCAP. It might show up in other tools if you're looking for these indicators. In addition to kind of those atomic indicators, you're also going to have a behavior change. So when you ran this scan, there's an increase in HTTP 404s for pages not found. The scanner is looking for very specific pages, and so when the server's like, hey, I don't have those pages, you're going to have an increase in 404s coming back. You're also going to have an increase in 501s, unsupported methods, unsupported options. These scanners will sometimes look for those features, and especially if it's looking for vulnerabilities, it's going to look for certain functionality, and oftentimes you'll see an increase in HTTP codes coming out. This is kind of indicators of the behavior of the scan itself more so than something directly out of the plugin. This is something an attacker, they can't really avoid it. It's going to be harder to avoid because at the end of the day, they have to make a request, and that request is going to lead to a 404 if that page doesn't exist. The SMB enumeration also includes data, so it's not just about HTTP. In this case, you have access denied messages, and these access denied messages are actually tied to the accounts they're using. You also have disabled account queries. So in this case, this module tries to use the guest account. And on this machine, from the SMB status code, you have those, hey, account was disabled. But the sign of that guest account trying to get accessed around the same time as HTTP is one way you might correlate this scanning behavior together using different traffic, different protocols. Some of these indicators have actually been in Nmap a long time. So one of the common URLs that I've seen, and I've seen this actually out in quite a few production networks where we saw Nmap being used, was nice ports trinity.text.back. This is actually a service detection enumeration, and I have a screenshot from the forum post in 2006 where actually the creator of Nmap, the original creator, added this into the framework. This was added in 2006, as I said, so this indicator has been around a while. It's had a long shelf life. Again, this one might not run unless you're running certain command flags, but this is a pretty good sign that Nmap's being run on your network. So attackers might use a smarter approach and do a SYN scan. So a SYN scan just uses one part of the TCP handshake. So when that TCP connection is stood up, you have the client sending the SYN, the server responds with the SYN ACK, and the client responds with an ACK, and then the TCP connection is set up. In a SYN scan, the attacker just sends a SYN packet to see if the port's listening. If the port's not listening, you might get a reset, or the connection might just close. If the port is listening, then the server is going to send a SYN ACK back. This is actually the technique that APT34 and 39 used, and the command that we use, or the command that we're showing on the screen, is actually showing the command that they use. Obviously, the IP address and port's a little different here. There's fewer direct atomic indicators, but there's still statistical indicators here. And what you see in this case, the attacker just sees, hey, the ports are open. They don't have all that fancy SMB information because the SMB enumeration tool didn't run. And same with HTTP. You just see HTTP alt. It doesn't have enough information to know that it's the Python service that's actually running back there. Those statistical indicators, though, is if the client just sends that SYN and they only have that connection half open, you're eventually going to have a flood of resets from that target host. And how big this flood is going to depend on the number of hosts and ports targeted. So if they throw this at your entire network and they're throwing it at the entire range of ports, you're going to have a ton of resets. If they only run it at a small portion of your network, or a small, just the common ports, port 80, some of the other ports they care about, you're going to have kind of a smaller wave of resets coming back at you. You might need to adjust the detection time a little bit for this. But at the end of the day, you're going to have that change in TCP behavior just by the fact that it's the nature of how TCP works and how these scans work. So these indicators are not unique to Nmap, and we're going to show kind of the Nikto example. So starting out with the very basic Nikto-H, giving it the IP, what you get back is, again, you get back basic vulnerability information. So here it's saying, hey, this port here, and this is just the simple HTTP server in Python. It's saying, hey, this is a code or directory listing. as an attacker, that might be interesting to then say, okay, I'm going to spider through that or see if there's sensitive documents or other documents I can pull that'll help me here. Also, what you might see here is some other vulnerabilities based on what this scanner is capable of seeing. Starting with the very basic no option set in there, you have very obvious Nikto URLs. And just like Nmap, these URLs are often hard-coded straight into the plugins. You also have a very specific Nikto user agent. In this case, it has the Mozilla 5.0. It actually has the very specific version of Nikto being run. And then it tells you the test that was run. So that test ID is actually the plugin ID. And evasions is, we'll talk about that next slide. In this case, there were no evasions, but what evasion shows is some of the just the attacker command line flags that they can use to get around certain parts of detection. But the point here is that default Nikto scans also aren't very stealthy. In a lot of ways, if you're just looking at things like user agents and URIs, you can detect these out of the box often. So what an evasive one might look like, though, is if you add evasion 1, then what happens is instead of that request here, so here you see kind of those encoded characters there, instead of sending just the nice ASCII string there, it's going to do the character encodings. And this is valid in HTML. The server's just going to translate this over. But where this will actually trip up your defenses is if your IPS, your IDS, or the detection rules are looking for that string, this is not an exact match of that other string. So if your IPS or IDS rules isn't looking for those iterations of plain text string with the encoded string, it's going to miss it in transit, even though to the server on the other end, they're going to, turn everything back into that normal string. This might actually get past a lot of your detection. And the other flag in here that's interesting is we talked about that user agent being obvious, where we talked about where certain protocol fields could be edited. By just adding the TAC user agent nope, you can see now our user agent is nope. So no longer do we have that nice, evasions and test field in there as we would in the default case. But what we still have here is an HTTP 404 spike in that short time window. So again, the attacker can't avoid the protocol behavior of HTTP. The trends are changing. Anomalies matter here. So thanks for joining in. We hope you'll join us next week. And yeah, thanks a lot.